Great. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you are all here. Share my, I'm a little under the weather today. I don't know about all of you, but I am feeling a little under the weather. And I'm going to be talking about happiness. Go figure. Right. Okay. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome, Erica and Allie. It's so nice to see you. I'm so glad you're here. And Lori, and I don't know who iPhone 8 is, but welcome. And thank you all for joining us. Today, my name is Dr. Serena Wadhwa. I'm your host of Real Talk the Pendulum. And today we're continuing on with happiness and what it is and how you could cultivate it and all that stuff related to it, since August is about happiness. And just really just overall, that kind of overall kind of transitionary month, I think it is. Katie, welcome. I'm so glad you're able to join us tonight. It's good to have you here. So I know last time, a couple weeks ago, when I was talking about happiness, I kind of talked about what it is and different definitions and looking at um, how it can be defined. And really, when we talk about happiness, it is looking at how you yourself are defining it and what that means to you, because happiness can be, as the definitions indicated, a state of well-being, a state of joy, contentment, pleasure, good fortune, things like that. And in essence, one of the things to be mindful about with this definition is that most people really find it to be this kind of extreme state. And I think it's important also when we talk about happiness to recognize that happiness as an extreme, and this is what the pendulum is about, is that anytime that we're existing in this kind of pendulum state, one extreme or the other, those are really hard to sustain. And so the idea is, how do you find that kind of the harmony, right? It's about harmonizing these pendulum states. What's the middle ground between the two? And so it's finding that kind of sweet spot that exists where you have this. One of my students was talking about this in her, my students did this kind of mock psychoeducational group as part of this group class that I was teaching over the summer. And she had called it micro joys. And I thought that was a really neat term. That you're looking for ways to find micro joys, basically. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we talked a little bit about the things that hinder happiness. We talked about things that contribute to happiness, and recognizing too, that in essence, this is kind of, the second chakra, which is the sacral chakra. This is the space of joy. The second chakra is all about emotions. It's about joy and vitality. And so it's in essence what is cultivated in this area. So this is really about the state of fluidity. And even in of itself, it talks about how the state of joy can be fluid. And so it's not like this concrete set point of happiness that exists. It is going to ebb and flow depending on other things that are around it. And, as I've talked about in other podcasts, a lot of that's going to be influenced by the root chakra, which is the chakra below the sacral energy, the level below. And that is, of course, your flight fight, your brain. That's how grounded we feel, or how ungrounded we feel. It's also about our thoughts and are about things in our environment and things like that. So this is where we left off last time. And so how can you actually cultivate uh, happiness. And so the third chakra really talks about the solar plexus energy, and this relates to personal power. And so the solar plexus is the chakra level that's right before the fourth level, which is the heart chakra, anahata, which is actually the bridge to the higher vibrational chakras. And so the lower three chakras are more about the self. And so the root chakra, the sacral chakra, the solar plexus chakra, these are all different chakras that really are focused more internally, more about me, ego, very egocentric. And you know, a lot of times people, when they are establishing themselves, if you think about kids and as, you know, adolescents, identity is important. Who am I? What am I going to do in my life? Those kinds of things. These are all very, very important questions that people are trying to figure out about what's going on for them. Um, if people are struggling with different issues, these are also things that come up as well. And so they can contribute to their happiness quota, so to speak. So these are some different ways you can cultivate happiness. And they relate to the solar plexus as well, because they do have a lot to do with goal setting, with the ability to be willing. You know, the opposite of willing is willfulness, and willfulness is egocentric. It is about doing it my way, and not kind of seeing if there is a more effective way of doing something. Because it may not always be that my way works in the most effective way. I know many times, you know, I have one way of doing things, and then when I tell somebody about it and they tell me that, you know, what about this way? And it sounds better. It's like, oh yeah, that actually does sound like it's going to work better. You know, then it's about being able to let that go and see perhaps if there is a different way of doing something. Not saying that you're going to like that, because, you know, as a person, sometimes we don't like letting go of that control, which is what this chakra is about. However, the idea behind it is recognizing that there is this kind of state of flow. So the first one that comes up is compassion. And this is also about self-compassion. And when you look at the definition of compassion, the compassion is the desire to relieve suffering. We are very good at having compassion for other people, but it's very rare that we have compassion for ourselves, you know, to relieve our own suffering. We will stay in suffering. And sometimes, you know, that could be for different reasons, you know, whatever that may be. But really, it's about how do we find relief from our own suffering. And, you know, I watched this movie. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie, Imaginary Friends. What a great movie, a great concept. And, you know, many people have probably had imaginary friends growing up, you know, where you talk to this imaginary being or friend or whatever, as someone that you could just talk to when you didn't have an adult or a human around. There was another being, or someone that may or may not have been imaginary. I mean, who knows? But just someone or something that could provide some comfort and some companionship and some compassion. And that was a way that, you know, kids generally also provide their own compassion too. But that's kind of, you know, what compassion is about. The second one is kindness, and this is doing something for another person without expecting anything in return. So it's really kind of a win-win, because, you know, kindness, this is, you've heard random acts of kindness, right? And a lot of people talk about how when you do random acts of kindness, you're doing it in the service of somebody else. But a lot of research actually points out that when we engage in doing random acts of kindness, we also get benefits from doing that. We feel good about doing something that we are able to do for somebody else who may not be in a position to do it for themselves. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, being able to offer that kindness or extend that kindness to somebody else, because we are in a position to do that. It's not about, like, you know, being egotistical. It's not about like being superior. It's just, you know, helping somebody have an opportunity to make their situation better, you know, one way of looking at it. And so it becomes a win-win situation. And, you know, as I was going through some of my notes about when I was putting this particular podcast together, I came across a lecture that I had attended, I mean, like, God, back in 2004 4, I think it was, and I still kept these notes, which I could not believe, but it was amazing and so like timely because the whole lecture was about just like, this exact topic was, how do you cultivate happiness? And so Folks, his name is David Folks, had talked about the research at the time. This was, in the beginning stages when positive psychology was just starting. And so in his presentation, and at least the notes that I found that I have, he describes that kindness is doing more than necessary. It's also about having a variety of different kinds of kindness. So you're not like doing the same thing. You're kind of randomizing it and changing it up a little bit because as we know, variety is like the spice of life. It kind of adds something new, different, that can be part of your experience. And also he says, volunteering is like kindness because you are offering up some of your time to somebody else who, or an organization or whatever it may be. Maybe it's your neighbor that you're volunteering to do some service or whatever that may be like. But service in general is an act of kindness because you are essentially helping out other people that are not in the same position or space that you are in. And so you are, helping to relieve some suffering and offer some support. Meditation is another one, mindfulness. I've talked about this before. But basically how you can cultivate happiness, when I talk about mindfulness and meditation, mindfulness is really about attention, what you're paying attention to. And so if you're looking at what am I paying attention to in this particular moment, oftentimes you can cultivate happiness by just shifting that focus of attention. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because that's a really great tool to help shift perception and also shift experience too. Savoring is another one. There's been a lot of research about this too. And I took a course online. There was a course, I think I mentioned this before, from Yale or Harvard, one of the two, about the science of well-being. And it was offered by one of the professors who put this together. It was the most attended class at the university there. And what the professor did, Dr. Santos did, is, she put all this research together about the science of well-being, basically. And savoring is something we don't often talk about, savoring. But savoring is really about enhancing an experience. And so you do this by, things that, you have good memories about or things that really, even in the moment that you're like, wow, this is just such an awe moment. You take a picture, or you get a memento of it. And those are ways that you savor those kinds of moments of happiness, because when you go back to that picture or you recount that memory or you remember it or you're telling that experience to somebody, you're actually in it, you're savoring it, you're really enjoying that moment when you experienced it in reality. And so savoring is really that you're bringing your attention back to that particular moment that held that happiness or that joy or whatever that positive experience was like for you. And so you could do it in, all those different ways. And there are lots of different kind of concrete and tangible things that you could use for that, like recording it in a journal or taking a picture or finding a memento. A lot of times people will, when they go on vacations, for example, and they really have a valuable experience, they might bring like a picture back or some sort of knickknack from a place that they went to that they really enjoyed and put it in their home. And it serves as a reminder of that experience. And that, in essence, is kind of like savoring it because every time that you see that particular knickknack, right, it becomes like a reminder of that place that you went to that held, maybe more than one or two great experiences for you. Gratitude is another one. This is about appreciation of what you have. And, the research really finds that when people do gratitude types of activities, it actually reduces comparison. social comparison. And social comparison is really high these days. I mean, this is what social media is all about, right? And so when we experience gratitude or when we practice the art of gratitude, it actually reduces our I don't the way that we may compare ourselves with other people, because we're actually taking notice and appreciating and staying present with what it is that we have, rather than looking at what we don't have and what other people have, that we seem to be lacking. So it's a way of kind of cultivating and even just kind of expanding how appreciative we may feel about the things that we currently have. I mean, I remember once, this was just a couple of weeks ago too, actually, when my building was, the water had shut down, and I remember, just like for 6 hours, we had no water, and it was one of the hotter days that happened. And then the air had to be turned off as well. And a friend of mine, I was telling a friend of mine about this, and it was like, yes, and it makes you appreciate, and I was like, yes, these are third world problems, and at the same, or first world problems, I'm sorry. And it makes me appreciate the fact that I live in a place where I have running water and I have an AC unit, because imagining what it's like not to have these things in like in third world countries or something really makes me grateful for this experience. So it was a way to kind of really recognize just how grateful I was to live in a space where I have this, and to not have it for 6 hours was a way to contrast that. Um, Number six is higher self. And this is really about like kind of embracing your future self. Really looking at this kind of new person. All of us have this kind of ideal person that we envision ourselves or kind of talk about being, oh, if I only had time, I would be more like this. Or, when this happens, I want to do this. So this is kind of like a future self um, vision that we have. And, that future self role is something that we can kind of step into in the present to start cultivating that happiness in the present, because it doesn't have to be like a huge thing that we do in order to step into that role. It could be a very small step that we make that has a huge impact in the kind of experience that we have. So for example, one of the things that I talk about and or have talked about is writing more. That's always been something I've wanted to do. And so I've always envisioned it, oh, when this happens, I'm going to write more. Well, I started to do that more a little bit each day. And one thing that has been more consistent for like almost 2 years now is journaling every morning. That's just one way that I've been able to be more consistent with writing on a regular basis. And then that has kind of led to the next step, which is to write um, some publications, to start writing bigger things related to that. And so it's like just one little small step that allows for the bigger things to kind of come into that space with it. And so it's like you're stepping into that higher self of who you envision yourself to be in the future. It's a way to kind of bring that future into your present. And so that you merge the two together, and so that it is actually happening in the moment. And then you're cultivating that happiness in the present, because this is all about, your goals. This is about you. This is about that state of flow. This is about what's going to help you become this person that you are envisioning yourself to be, basically. Um, and so those are the ways that you can cultivate happiness from this point. So this is the heart chakra. And then the heart chakra, I talked about this before, is really about this kind of unstuck chakra. So this is really the bridge to the higher vibrational chakras, where you have a very different kind of perception, very different um, uh, experience when you're operating at a different level of vibration. And so perception is different. So when people are like stuck in heart chakra, it is about tunnel vision. I mean, this is what happens when people are stuck or struck. They're still afflicted by something. And so there is this ego kind of focus that happens. And I kind of look at ego as an acronym, meaning ending growth options. So it's like a way that the self is limiting perception, because we're not able to really see beyond our own perception. We're limited by our own experiences. We're limited by how we've been affected by other people's actions, rather than taking the whole picture into consideration, because we don't really know what's going on, with people, places, and things, with things that are happening in the world, whatever, everything is happening and we don't know the bigger picture, so to speak. And so it's really about like, okay, I don't really know this whole big picture. I only know one piece of the puzzle. And so if I then operate from this perception, everything then filters through this kind of tunnel vision. And that's really what this is about, is that when we get stuck in this muck, I call it muck because it's this kind of combination of, this filtered mirror and also this yuckiness kind of feeling. It's like this kind of perpetual an uneasiness that people experience. And so when you do have experiences, that continuously affect you and, affect how you perceive things that happen, or how people are treating you, rather than having set boundaries or being able to be clear in communication, there is then going to be this muck that affects clarity and whatnot. And so then there's this negative energy that kind of goes abound. And then there's all this chaos and a lot of effort that takes place. But when there isn't this muck, and this is what being unstruck and unstuck is about, is that when there isn't this muck, when things are very clear, and when there isn't this kind of attachment to perception or to, this limitation, quote unquote, things flow with ease. Things become much easier, and things become more in harmony. And that's what harmonizing the pendulum is about, is that, it's kind of clearing this muck and really getting down to what the core of the truth is for a person, because that's what the clarity is about. And once people are understanding the first three chakras, kind of recognizing what that's about and recognizing what the top three chakras are about for themselves, harmonizing this pendulum really is about the heart chakra. And that's when this space becomes a lot more clearer, and it becomes more easier. So cultivating happiness, so shifting perception. This is really about looking at how you can shift your perception about things. It's not saying to do it, but it is saying if you want an opportunity to try something different, these are some different ways to do it. Again, perception is the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. It's the way that we understand things and the way we interpret things. And again, our perceptions are based on our experiences. And so if we've had very negative experiences, we're going to perceive things through that lens, until we have some clarity about what that means and who we are, not because of those negative experiences. At the core, of who we are as a person, we're a human and we're a being. And so it's recognizing that sometimes we're operating only as a half of that. We're only operating as a human, or we're operating as a being, not as a human being. And so it's really about what am I perceiving and what is that based on? And so what affects your ability to perceive the experience of joy or happiness? I've talked about trauma before. I've talked about, mental health disorders and substance use disorders. And again, the root chakra, which is about the brain too. This is about how grounded you are. This is about, the fight and flight response, the stress response. This is all about that stuff too. So these are different things that are going to either hinder or interfere with perception of happiness or joy. And so it's really just kind of recognizing what is it that gets in the way of experiencing this. Because once you're able to really identify what those things are from a root chakra, from a brain perspective or from a background perspective, what has happened uh, that impedes this for me, then you can start working on what are some options that I have in order to heal from this. The second one talks about, the who, what, where, when, and how. So what do you focus on? Who are you around? When do you feel the most happy? How do things around you impact you? Do you freeze? Do you avoid things, etc.? Looking at your own definition of happiness, is it very extreme or is there some sort of, in between in it? When you observe happiness in other people, what are you focusing on? What do you notice about other people's states of happiness and when you tend to notice that? And then trust, happiness on your own terms. This is my definition of trust, that it has four different elements, that it's simple, that it's clear, it's consistent, and that there's action involved, there's follow through. So I know that happiness comes when these four elements are in place for me. And so when things are simple, when things are clear, when there's consistency with something, and there's action or follow through involved, that's stuff that I do and stuff that I see happening around me. That's what that I can trust that, oh, this is going to bring happiness, or this is how I know I'm feeling happy, or will bring happiness to me, or some state of positivity at some point because of my past experiences. And so it's really understanding, what your own definition is of trusting your process and being able to see kind of like what is more of the extraordinary in ordinary situations. And then the last part of this, which I'm going to go through really quickly because I know we're out of time pretty soon, is shifting your experience. And so you could use boosters. This is going to be like, we talked a lot about this before, but touch, taste, smell, the five senses, great thing. Eye candy is wonderful. Just like things that pleasantly are visual for you. Sights or sounds, smells, taste, touch, those kinds of things. 6 seconds, hugs can release oxytocin and serotonin. Those are things that will then chemically release that bonding type of feel-good experience. In this book, I don't know if any of you remember the book, The Happiness Project. Gretchen Rubin wrote this book back in 2009, 2012, somewhere around there. But she talked about her 1 year experience with cultivating happiness. And so I went back to this book because I remember I wrote a blog about this, but I have all these happiness books for some reason that I bought. And so I went back to these resources to look at some of these different information. And so she defined fun as either being challenging, accommodating, or relaxing. Challenging and accommodating are more about mastery and bonding. Relaxing is really just leisure. And, you don't really, it doesn't involve skill. Number three is about spending out or spend out. This is when you're saving those things, for like, you're saving things for like that day, that special occasion. Her thought was about just use it because it's bringing you joy and happiness anyways. Use it now and enjoy that moment while you can. So I really thought that was an interesting way to shift the experience because we save things for happiness moments to pump it up. And then we expect more of those pumped up experiences to happen. And instead of doing that, the idea is why not just cultivate the experience of happiness by using that item and then experiencing that joy or happiness in the moment. Doing things differently, sometimes, we may need to shift what we do and just try something different. Because sometimes even when we get into a regular routine, it can shift our own experience of what that means for us. And so even just introducing something new can create a different type of perception, and it can create different chemical reactions. We may experience more dopamine, we may experience more serotonin, we may just feel good about the fact that we tried something different, which we normally may not do. Because routine, is very, we're creatures of habit. And so routine is something that keeps us structured and keeps us okay, while at the same time, we also crave spontaneity and freedom. And so again, it's really about harmonizing those two very extreme states and looking at, okay, what's the kind of quote unquote happy medium? Number 5 talks about reality versus fantasy. So this is really about recognizing that, having a goal and looking at what does this look like in your reality? Because a goal without a plan is just a dream. And so it's really about, we could fantasize about things all we want, that we want this or we want that. But if we don't have a plan for it, then, what is it doing for us? And how is it actually cultivating and shifting our experience of happiness? So it's really looking at what resources we have that we can make this a reality. What are our expectations with it? Recognizing it's not about perfection, it's about progress, and things like that. And then, of course, connecting with other people, or connecting the dots, I'm sorry. And Dr. Nevins in this book, he said 100, what was it, 100 Secrets to Happiness. This was a book that came out in the early 2000s. He talked about how that science is noticing patterns. And once you're aware of patterns, you can make informed choices. You have options. And so when you connect the dots, and I talked about this before, but science really is about noticing patterns. And we talk about noticing patterns of things all the time. And so once you find out what your patterns are about different things, what keeps me from being more happy, what prevents me from seeing happiness in my own life or cultivating it more, then you're able to do something different about it. So I know the last part of that was really quick, but these are the resources that I used for this particular presentation. I just wanted to give a moment if anybody wanted to share a couple words before we wrap it up for next time. All right. Well, thank you for staying on a few extra minutes. And in 2 weeks, we will be talking about suicide prevention. So thanks for joining us, and have a good rest of your night, everyone.